Okay,
Oh, darn.
thanks for catching that.
Anybody else? Okay. I think that I will see you. Oh, no, happy Thanksgiving. Did I say that? Happy Thanksgiving. Okay. I'll see you
All
next month.
right. Thank you. Drive safely.
Thank you.
All right, Lincoln, budget proposal.
All
You're
right,
on.
so
You're on.
I am going to share my screen here. And go to the proposed budget. This is like our fourth amended budget. I've been through this a number of times now and it keeps changing. So hopefully this is the last one for the year. But a few of the changes, I mean, the most significant one is as you look at the conservation area fund and see this interfund loan here. That's the loan proposed from stewardship to the conservation area fund for the purchase of Glenwood Inn. And we'll touch on that in a bit. And also we've revised the rate figures upward. We actually have a little bit, another adjustment to make, but it's not important. It's additional revenue and state grants. So these are the critical ones here. Any questions on revenues for the conservation area fund? All right, well, pardon my scrolling, but this is the easiest way to do it. So the new proposed acquisitions that we put in this fourth budget amendment. One is for the Hauschka properties, both the Prohaska and Katy Mountain property, the beginning of a 4-year payment for both of those. And the seller has agreed to finance those. That's what enables us to do it. Second is Glenwood Inn, where we have 4.5 million proposed to go toward that purchase. And I'll come back to what's happening on that one later on, but we've put this into the budget. And then the last one for the Higgins property, where we originally had thought we were going to partner with the Preservation Trust on this. And then I was quite hopeful that we were going to have the Conservation Fund actually step in and make this purchase, but that did not happen. And now we basically have decided that it makes the most sense for the land bank to purchase the property now with the intent of reselling it to the Bureau of Land Management down the road, which is what the Conservation Fund would have done also. So that's a big change. Any questions on the acquisitions?
I'm sorry. Let's see who else. I have a question, but I can't see anybody else to see who has their hand raised. Okay, I'll ask. First, so you have Glenwood in there. I thought that we couldn't put an acquisition in until we had a purchase and sale agreement.
So we, together with the Preservation Trust, have made an offer on the property at 5 million, which the seller is considering. They're going to list the property. We knew that was going to happen. I put it in there because this is really the best we can do at this point. And the seller knows of the offer that we made. So that's generally why we don't put numbers in there unless we have a signed purchase and sale agreement. In this case, they know where we stand. So it's not going to have any impact on the sales price of the property.
I see. That's the main reason for
Yeah.
doing that. My other question was about Higgins. Because the way you phrased it was purchasing it with the intent of reselling to Bureau of Land Management, which is what we have been planning for. But at the last community conversation, there were a few people that had some hesitations about that. And so I'm wondering, when we approve an acquisition, do we need to, or this one in particular, do we need to say our intent is to resell it, and then that means that transfer it, that means that that's what we're held to because that's was our intent? Or do we still have the option open for deciding at a future date what we want to do in terms of who would hold the property?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think that's something that we're held to. And I have changed the project proposal to reflect what's going on, which will be going to council again. I think the critical piece when we do a project summary as part of a budget, sometimes when we're doing a conservation buyer type project where we think we might resell to a private owner with a conservation easement, it's important to put that in there because we don't really want to be in a position where we purchase property and people assume it's going to be protected in perpetuity, and then all of a sudden we're turning around and selling it. That would just be extremely destructive to our credibility. So in this case, just spelling it out that this is our intention, is what we want to do. It's not 100% guarantee that BLM will buy it. It's going to take quite a while. We're talking, this is going to be a 2, 3, 4, even 5-year period where we're going to own this property, because they need to line up Land and Water Conservation Fund money in order to make the purchase. They're very interested in it, but that's a long process. So lots of things can happen in the interim. If that doesn't come to pass, it doesn't come to pass. I think our backup plan would be to sell a conservation easement to the Preservation Trust. So at least we'd get some money back out of this.
Could we reword it to say that with the, I'm just curious maybe what other commissioners think, or maybe this isn't the appropriate time to discuss it. I guess I would just like to reopen the discussion at some point, and so that we have the option, instead of saying this is what we're doing, as long as they'll accept the property, maybe we should just do a rediscuss of pros and cons, just base. So curious if anyone else has those thoughts, or maybe you have something that you want to add. Maybe there's something I'm not thinking of in terms of is the intent to, in order to make our funds go further, if we can have someone else purchase it and manage it, then that frees up our funding, or is it logistics of managing? Just wondering if it's to be, if with something we can that we can talk about, and if there's a way if there is some question among other commissioners, can we reword the the purchase proposal in your acquisition updates to say that it's with the option of doing something without really saying it's our absolute intent. You have thoughts?
Sandy, are you asking why we should reconvey it to the BLM? Are you questioning that?
Well, at this point, I'm wondering if there's any resistance to just, yes, I guess I am. I don't think that changes what's in our proposed budget. I think we're still moving forward and we're fine we can go ahead and approve it. Just if there's what's tied to that is a project summary and you go to the council and say, this is what we intend to do, does that, should that be worded a little more openly that we have the option, or that just leaving us a little bit of room for us or future commission to decide what they want to do. I'm just curious, or are you, Lincoln and other commissioners, feeling for sure, yes, this is what we want to do? Krista.
Well, I think it speaks to transparency, which has been one of the topics that came up during the survey, through the survey and different conversations. So I'm not opposed to adding some language that doesn't box us in, but if, we should speak to what our intention is and what our capacity is, maybe with a caveat that things without signed documents or agreements, some of that could change. Once you're in a signed agreement, then I would guess you're locked into whatever has been put down to paper. So I think, it's worth having some discussion, because I think it does speak to trying to articulate clearly what our plan is going forward for the next year or 2 years or whatever, with the acknowledgement that circumstances can change, that it may not actually end up being that way. But I think, so any way that we can add some transparency is fine. The risk you run is being wishy-washy, or you're just kind of opening it up to anything can happen, I don't think we have to go that far. But so I think it would be fine if we could somehow articulate what our intent is, with the understanding that things change. And so within the best of our ability, that's the direction we're going. So that's what I would say.
David?
I think we need to be really clear at this point that the original thought was to have the BLM be the ultimate owner. We heard really clearly in the community conversation that some folks have reservations about the BLM as the owner. But the question, yes, maybe with the BLM as the ultimate owner, there are some compromises made, but does that mean we should do nothing? Or does that mean we should buy this outright with the intent of keeping it? And we've been looking at some pretty large projects lately, and I think that we need the flexibility, and we need to be really clear that we need the flexibility.
Krista.
I have another question. So related to this is not within this budget, but it'll come up, I guess, maybe when we're discussing Higgins. My greater concern is, because it has changed, we were going to facilitate this purchase and transfer, and now we are actually purchasing and with the intent to transfer. That puts us more in the driver's seat. So maybe we will talk about that later. I think Higgins is coming up in the director's report, but that's kind of, I'm looking more at that, since now we will be the owner, and that puts us in the seat of responsibility for management and everything that we thought the conservation fund was going to take on as their responsibility. So that's now where my questions lie. So not so much in this proposed budget, but when we get down to the discussion of Higgins, I'm interested in that.
I would just add on that project too, that there is another possibility, another possible outcome, which probably we should talk about. I don't think we need to do this today. But we know there is a lot of interest on the part of the tribes in this property. And it could be that they end up purchasing it. The big change, if that were to happen, would be the potential for not having public access on it, because that's a big question for them. Again, I think we need to have that discussion. We can have it over time and see how these things play out, because we just don't know. That may not be an option at all, but it's something that is out there as one potential outcome.
Any other commissioners with questions or comments? And then we'll open it up for public comment. Is that right? For the proposal before we ask for a vote?
Yeah, we should just take a quick look at the stewardship part of the budget before we
Oh,
do that.
okay.
Yeah, I do have a comment. I think we ought to give Lincoln actually the widest range or operation on this one. This is a property that I think we all agreed was, it's kind of the top priority for us right now. And I would just like to see us have the greatest flexibility, purchase it now and see what happens down the road. He's given us 3 options and who knows what's going to happen. So I think that's the most important thing.
Brian?
Yeah, Sandy, I agree with what Doug said, and in fact, what everybody has said. I don't sense any real disagreement among the commissioners, but I think that our purchase of the fee property puts us in the driver's seat with regard to the decision on what comes next, whether we transfer it and to whom, and if we transfer it, under what conditions. That gives us the choice, which I think is important. So I would support going ahead as Lincoln has proposed it.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, we will open it up to, I'm sorry, no, we're going to the stewardship portion of the budget. Yes.
Yeah, let me just spend a minute on that. So here's the stewardship and management fund budget. As you can see, really the only big change here is that additional, the 3 million, which is the loan to the conservation area fund. So that's the critical element here. Just gonna search now. I think that's it. So obviously that will pull down our the funds in our reserve, but the proposal is to repay that money with 2.5% interest over a 4-year period. So that's what we've got at this point. Any questions on that?
I have a question, Lincoln. How did you arrive at the 2.5%? I noticed that we've agreed to pay Hauschka over a similar period of time, a close period of time, 5%. And I was just wondering how the 2.5% was determined.
Well, that's a great question. So for an interfund loan, the requirement is going to be to pay the interest rate that is being received by the LGIP plus a small additional percentage, which I think means theoretically we could borrow and pay 0.2% interest or something like that. The thought, though, is that we want to pay more than that because ultimately this is our fund. It's a way of being able to utilize that money, but also to make sure that we have an additional amount for the Stewardship Reserve Fund. Since we're not making any interest on it now, this is what makes it attractive to use a 2.5% number. We don't have to use the 2.5% number. It's just something that seemed appropriate. I don't know what, does that answer your question? Maybe not.
No, that does. I'm actually fine with the 2.5%. I just thought that we ought to maybe put it on the record why we've chosen that percentage.
Yeah, and I think with the Lester property, when we did this, I think we used a 3% number there. But 2.5, it's a fantastic rate of return. I'll tell you that by comparison to what we're getting back.
By the way, Lincoln, do we have any indication as to whether or not the council will go along with that loan? I know that Mylene has opposed it, and do we have
No,
any?
I think we're in good shape there. We did have a conversation with the Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee is the chair of the council, the auditor, Mylene, and the treasurer, Rhonda. We had a good discussion. They ended up voting. They voted 2-1 in favor of making the loan. So that's basically what has gone forward to council. And I think
Great.
that does it for me if we want to go on to the next, to the public comment period.
Okay, let's do that. Let's open it up to public comment regarding this budget proposal. Tracy?
I'd like to speak on the, on behalf, well, not behalf, but my view on the Higgins property, and I can hold it if there's another public round after the Higgins presentation. But this would be in regards to Sandy, your statements and concerns and what Krista speaks to as well. So
Go
if
ahead.
I could take a minute. I'm a member of the Monument Advisory Committee, reappointed for another 3 years for the cultural lead. And there's still so much we as a MAC do not know, and even our district managers do not know what's going to be in the, if we have an updated resource management plan. And we get small hints, but we also haven't had the ability to meet on this property and discuss it as a MAC. We will have meetings in February, I believe, are still in the process, but should be approved and in May. And we're hearing that hopefully we may have a record of decision sometime within that time frame, and a new hire for the monument manager. So a lot of things are being updated, and the concerns at the community forum had to do with, say, dispersed camping. And those are things we don't know, and we won't know until we get this record of decision. There still could be action taken into the future, but I have learned through the next phase will be implementation. And if there's sensitive areas to the tribes, the BLM may not need to restrict access to the whole property. They can close off areas. It can be seasonal closures. There are a lot more things that can happen in the implementation. We still all have concerns about the lack of senior members of BLM that have been cleaned out at the top level. and a good article in the Washington Post yesterday, really clearly defining that. So hopefully within a 5-year, 5-year window, we're going to have a much better idea. But leaving the option on the table for the land bank to retain ownership is personally, I think, wise decision. And let's just keep our fingers crossed that between 141 protests against what was in the proposed RMP, the governor's letter, our council letters, and so forth, that some of the things that we so just were against are listened to. And so let's just hope for the best for the spring. We'll know more. We also have been operating on a short MAC group. All of our positions have been filled for a number of years. We have not been able to meet. And currently our positions have been filled and we are acting on a full MAC committee, including tribal representative of a person that has been born and raised on Lopez, Sam Barr. So I'm looking at the positive side as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy, for giving us important information. Pertinent. Thank you. Any other comments related to the fourth amended budget proposal? Okay, no comments. So do we have a motion to, oh, there is a public comment. Kathy Moore.
I just have a little update because I'm on the ferry and it is a 4-boat day if anybody needs to go anywhere. So you guys were talking about the ferries. There are 4 boats running. The 3rd boat is not on the radar yet. So I thought I'd share that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if there's no more public comments, do we have a motion to approve the fourth amended budget proposal?
I'll move approval.
Right, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, with that, the fourth amended budget proposal presented today is approved by the commission. All right, Lincoln, do you want to begin the director's report?
Sure, I think we probably can start with the Higgins property since we've been talking about it. I don't know. We do now have a signed purchase and sale agreement with the seller. So we are moving forward with the goal of closing before the end of the year. I don't know if we have, if people have additional questions on that one at this point, but this is the time. Or I can just show you really nice pictures.
I have a question, Lincoln. Just going back to what I expressed earlier. So if we're now going to be holding it for the foreseeable, potentially short-term, but maybe long-term future, I guess I'd like to see some discussion at some point of what this does to our our stewardship or staff requirements. Because it's a sizable piece of property. It's not huge, but it's accessible by a variety of ways, not necessarily a car. And so I just see it requiring some more staff time. So I guess we have to look at that if we're going to actually hold it for a while.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's also complicated by the fact that right now, the Bureau of Land Management, who has been doing most of the routine maintenance at Watmow, while they still have a staff person, he's actually working remotely from Montana. and they have no manager, so they don't have anyone really on the ground.
Mhm.
We did in the 22 budget include money for a full-time seasonal worker. And that was mostly going, or at least 50% was going to go to Lopez. So that'll give us some additional capacity. But I think we're also going to need to engage with some of the volunteer groups, Friends of Chadwick Hill, which has regular monitors out there on that property, which is nearby. It makes a lot of sense for us to try and engage with them and others to see if we can get some volunteer stewards out there. I don't know, Amanda is on the call. I don't know, Amanda, if you have any comment on that.
I don't think I have anything additional to add, but I think those are good starting points.
So one of the things I am concerned about is, or not, I'm not concerned. I would like us to address the topic of transparency on this property because it is private, it has been private property. It has not been accessible by the vast majority of our community, but the potential for access and the desire for access could get revved up pretty quickly. And so I just think we need to keep talking to people about, we need to talk as a commission on, is our priority to preserve and conserve? Is our priority to make it accessible? And we just need to keep that out, get in front of that train in terms of anybody starting to assume that it's going to be another, preserve accessible to the community. I'm not saying it won't be, but I'm just saying we just need to talking about that.
Lincoln, I see Doug, let me just ask a quick question. Lincoln, are the family members who are living there, and there was discussion about having them stay on as caretakers for a time, is that?
Yeah, so first of all, there has been some confusion about exactly who is where. And as it turns out that there are no family members currently living on the property. They've actually moved to Virginia. So I don't know that that's a real option. It's something that we had held out to the family with the idea to kind of soften the transition for them a bit if they wanted to stay on as caretakers for a period of years even. That might be possible. I'll continue to talk to them. It doesn't seem likely at this point that that's going to happen. I would add just a recommendation based on Krista's comments that this site is really pretty, I don't know if delicate is the right word, but it's certainly highly significant. And so I think we need to take it slow in terms of allowing greater public access.
Sandy, you asked my
Yes.
question.
Yes, I did. Oh,
Yep, thank you.
okay. I thought if there were people there, it would change the, yes, Brian.
Sandy, just a question for Lincoln. Since the family has vacated, is there any possibility of our putting our own caretaker in the house?
We need to really evaluate that structure. It is the oldest house on Lopez. It's got some definite issues. So before we stick someone in there, I think we're going to have to do some assessment of the condition and systems that are present on it.
The Historical Society evaluated it maybe a week or two ago. I haven't heard a report back on that yet.
Okay, Lincoln, are we good to go on?
I'm done unless there are other
Okay.
questions on Higgins. I'll go on to the other ones.
Okay,
Ready?
yes.
All right. Glenwood Inn. So as I mentioned, we do have an offer on the table in partnership with a preservation trust. Actually, it's their offer. And the last word we have from the seller, we put an offer in for 5 million, which we think is a pretty good price for it, honestly. In both ways, both what the property's actually worth and what someone would actually pay for it, but not overpay for it. The seller's representative has obtained an appraisal, which we haven't seen the full appraisal. We've asked for it, but he hasn't provided it. He gave us the value page, which assigned a value of 7.5 million to it. But we have no idea what that's based on. His intention, it seems, is to list it for 7.9. So there's not a whole lot we can do about that. You know, we'll have to see who shows up and who is interested in the property. It's always been a very real possibility that someone will show up and throw crazy money at this, and there's just not anything we can do about that if that happens. But it is not an easy property either, so it may be pretty tough for them to find a buyer who is willing to do that. I don't know what it means once it's listed, if it sits on the market for some period of time, how we're going to play that, you know, when the estate representative might be willing to deal with us if there aren't other offers, or the offers have not exceeded what we've got on the table. Hard to say, but that's where we are with it.
Question.
Doug,
Lincoln, did you set a timeline as to the acceptance of the offer?
Oh, it's already expired. But that's the hard thing about being a conservation organization, is that they know we're interested. They know we're not going to walk from it. You know, we're just at a disadvantage like that. So they can use our offer even if there's somebody else who wants to bid on the property. It's unfortunate, but that's our reality.
Lincoln, so on the summary, project summary, you show that the acquisition cost is 5.5 million. That's what you said we put in as an offer, and we've got it 4.5.
Yeah, I put in some, that's what I expect the property might go for, 5.5. Our offer currently stands at 5 million.
And so if we're splitting that 50% with the Preservation Trust, technically 5 split in half is 2.5 million, but we just approved a project summary for 4.5 million. So is that to leave us room to increase our offer? Because it looks like the land bank is paying the lion's share of a $5 million offer, right? That's how I read that on paper.
Yeah, no, in the project summary, I think it spells out pretty clearly that what we're planning on doing here is splitting the acquisition cost with the Preservation Trust, whatever that turns out to be. And we don't know. Obviously, if the numbers start going up, we're going to have to come back and talk about that more. The idea of putting in more than our 50% is simply a way around the Preservation Trust having to go out and borrow money for their part of it. And that's, again, you know, we basically would be functioning as a bank for the Preservation Trust. And that's not something, that's something that we've done on other projects, essentially, where we've moved ahead of them and made a purchase, and then they have followed up purchasing a conservation easement from us. They did that on Beaverton. Most recently, we've also got an agreement with them on the Lopez Hill addition and on the Katy Mountain development, the Buck property on San Juan. So it's worked pretty well, but that's basically what we're proposing at this point.
You, Doug?
Lincoln, there was a fellow that was gonna put a bunch of money into the Youngren property, I think. And I forget his name, but is anybody, that apparently has not gone anywhere. Has anybody approached him to see if he might be interested in contributing to this project?
Yes, the Preservation Trust has talked to him. He is not interested in this particular project. There are some other folks out there who may be interested, I think mostly on behalf of the tribes, at the Lummi in particular, and the representatives of the Lummi have actually been out and toured the property, but we don't have anything. We don't have anything really from them. Not like we've got donors lined up to do that. That's just been kind of an ongoing conversation. And the rub there obviously is if the Lummi were to participate in this in some way, on this one in particular, if we're going to be a major player here, public access is just 100% critical and not negotiable. Doesn't mean that we would need public access to the entire property, but certainly a major reason for doing this is to allow people to get down to that shoreline. So that's something that we'd have to work through with them. It's not real. We don't have any partner yet in that way. So we'll see how it goes.
So go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Lincoln, I don't know whether you've had any direct contact with the Lummi on this, but you know, it occurs to me that and I didn't even realize their interest in Glenwood Inn, but that's just one of a number of properties where we have a common interest. Higgins, obviously, and also Hyde Point. So it seems like this would be a really good time for you or for some of us to sit down with them and start talking about what we might do together.
Yeah, I agree. We'll continue to have a dialogue here. I have not been dealing with the Lummi directly on this, but and the way this would work would not be that the tribe would actually come up with the money for the purchase. It would be donors, the way Hyde Point worked. And I don't think it'd be that same person. There are other donors apparently who are interested in bankrolling this for the Lummi. But you know, we'll just continue to work on it, see what we can do.
So I have a question. I'm wondering why we had this project. I know we just approved the budget and that's a done deal. But I'm wondering why we didn't save discussing numbers for executive session when it's not even on the market and it's coming on the market, and now we're basically have laid our cards out there. I'm just curious why we went that route.
I think the fact that we've made that the offer is on the table is the reason, and we don't know where that's going to go. The only part that's not on the table is the comment I made in the project summary about a potential sales price of 5.5. I mean, obviously we have not made that offer. We don't intend to make that offer unless we absolutely have to. But, and again, also, you know, we have a question about appraisal on this one, that our appraisal is significantly lower than even the offer we've made. We think the offer is justifiable, but there are a lot of moving parts. But yeah, I hear you. It may be that this would have been better to talk about in executive session, honestly. I don't think it's going to matter in the end. You know, the seller's representative is going to try and get the most possible money they can.
Hey, Lincoln, is it correct to say that once we've made an offer, they're free to disclose it to anybody they want to? I mean, it's public record the minute you hand it over.
Yeah,
Right.
so it was the Preservation Trust that actually made the offer with the potential to assign all or part of it. So the sellers got that in hand. They're more than free to take that and share it with any other prospective buyer.
So the fact that we're named as, well, I don't know if we're even named, but the Preservation Trust could assign some or all of it to anybody. That doesn't obligate us in any way.
No, no, it does not. We would have to come to agreement with the Preservation Trust if the seller were to sign that contract. So then we'd have to sit down and talk through exactly how it's going to work.
Right.
Anything else on that one? Okay, Hauschka. So the two pieces that we're acquiring, the 40 acres on top of Katy Mountain and on Prohaska Road, we do have signed purchase and sale agreements with them on both of those. We are working through some issues in the due diligence period, most particularly the access to the Katy Mountain one. It's not a huge issue in that we do have guaranteed pedestrian access to the property because it's connected to the rest of our Katy Mountain Preserve, and the principal access point for that will come off of Three Corner Lake Road, and people will be able to walk up to basically to the top of the mountain. So that's not in question. The seller's access is through their neighbor's property, and of course it's also a long way up Katy Mountain Road, like the rest of our properties up there. Are accessed principally off of Katy Mountain Road. We've never thought that that was a good route for public access. We've used it for maintenance purposes or restoration purposes. And that's what we would envision here. But in this particular case, there's been a bit of a dispute between the seller and their neighbor. And so we're just trying to work our way through that and hopefully come to a good agreement with that neighbor before we end up closing on it. Why not? It's got to have something, right? So questions on that one? Or those two? Prohaska, by the way, is quite clear in that it does connect to that county road. So there's no issue with access off of that. The only thing there is the adjacent property, which we elected not to purchase to the east, is going to have to, they're going to have to create a very small driveway connector from the piece that we're buying right at the corner as you come onto the property. That's because the neighbors to that other parcel we're in a dispute with them also about accessing it. So we'll give them an access easement. I don't see any issues with that. And fortunately, we'll just be catty corner to those other neighbors. So I don't think we're going to have too much to worry about there.
I just might add with regard to the Katy Mountain one, I'm well aware Lincoln has been working hard with the neighbors to come to an amicable resolution of that. And I'm certainly hopeful that we'll be able to do that.
So that's all I've got, unless you've got other questions.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. Take a 5-minute break.
It's nice to see Sandy and Brian, that you both can be in the same place at the same time.
I know, when I was looking at my screen before, we were next to each other and it looked like one continuous landscape.
We are.
We're on the same island. Waiting for Miles.
Miles is in transit.
He's in transit. Okay.
It's commuting to work.
Okay. All right. Then let's go ahead and call the meeting back into order and get into the stewardship report. Is that
Yes.
linked?
So
Okay.
a lot of what we're doing, we've got here is relating to the agricultural overview document and then Coffelt Farm. So I might ask Charlie to say a few words about those things.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so you've all have in your email box at least the second draft of the agricultural overview, objectives, and policy document. And as it stands, you have that, and then we've also sent it off to the Agricultural Resources Committee for them to begin to review and ideally get their feedback prior to sending it out to general public, but we can discuss that in timeline and how that can work. Handed that to the ARC last week, and I think they're going to schedule a subcommittee policy meeting to begin to go over it. But likely it'll take them a month until their next meeting mid-December to really make a vote on their feedback and provide it to us. So whether we can wait that long before we want to send it to general public is one question. And then any discussion you guys want to have at this point of that document. So I'll pass it on to you, Sandy, if you want to lead any further discussion or questions.
Yes, I wanted to say that I just think the document is excellent. I only had a few little tiny wee little tweaks to it, and I just think it's ready for public release. I'm curious what the other commissioners I have to say.
I agree.
I agree also. I think it was very well done and I think it should be, it can be released unless Charlie thinks that it's important to get the feedback from the agriculture resource folks first before we release it to the public.
Charlie, I think that is important to get the ARC feedback, but I think we're on a timeline for this where we want our ag policy to frame and be the background for our next steps on Kaufeld. And we're falling behind on that. So I think it's really important to go ahead to kind of shortcut the whole thing and go public with this. And I agree. I think it's an excellent document.
Good
Well,
comment.
thank you all. Yep. And yeah, I can check back in with ARC. I think it would be wise to, they were going to try and schedule a policy sub meeting, I think maybe next week. So chat with them, see if there's any major issues with the document and check in about that, their opinion on releasing it. I hear you on the timeline, but I also think it's really important to give ample time to stakeholders, and ARC being the representative of the ag community is just a great way to start that feedback. A lot of good folks in that group. So if you're willing to wait until we hear from them, hopefully next week, on what they think their timeline is. If it is going to take a month, then maybe we can send it out earlier and overlap.
Is there any reason that it can't run concurrently? That it's, the reason for doing it one step at a time would be to get their recommendations, and it will come back in a draft to us as to what we want to accept of theirs, and then before we take it to the next step. But couldn't they be looked at as stakeholders? I mean, as members of the community, just like the rest of the public commenting?
Yes, very much so. And like I said, I think waiting a week to have that first check-in, gonna see where it's tracking with them. If there's going to be major overhaul suggestions, would be helpful. They have, they've been advocating for us to do this for many years. So it seemed really important to give them some additional time to engage with it. I know they would have liked to be more engaged in these early stages, but it's an organic process, and but I think it's moving along well. And yeah, it's been a lot of positive feedback from all of you and everyone that's seen it so far. So, but I hear you that, yeah, the sooner we can get it out there, the better. And I'll relay that to them, and I think they'll understand the timeline with Kaufeld decisions, and that whole larger picture. And as you continue to read through it, feel free to send me your comments. I'm compiling on this draft now too. And also it's been a team effort, very much so. So thank you for everyone who's contributed.
Krista?
So I'm not clear on whether we're releasing it to the public or not yet. But I have a question prior to that. So if we were to release it tomorrow, do we have a timeline for what are we putting on that for public input? Do we have a period of time that we're outlining to the public to get feedback so that we can keep moving forward? I guess would be one of my questions. And then I think it feels like Charlie's walking a political tightrope. And so I don't know what direction we're giving him right now, if he is going back to the committee to see how quickly they can look at this. Yeah, I'm just not clear what we're doing right now, because it sounds like we want to move forward. 3 commissioners have said they want to move forward right now and let it go, and he's asking for a week delay to get feedback from that committee. And then what's his direction after he gets that feedback? Or we wanted him to release? I think we just needed a little more guidance.
I guess-
I'm waiting for a week.
Sorry,
I'm
I didn't hear you.
I'm okay with a week, but it doesn't make sense to me to wait a month.
Well, I think what he's saying is a week just to touch base with them to see how quickly they can get. We're not going to get feedback from them in the week. They don't meet for a week. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, Charlie, to give a nod to their importance in this process. If like the document I have with all that tracks all the changes thus far, can we, if this committee, this council is in agreement with what you've presented, can we start fresh with tracking changes and be able to highlight what ARC is going to be sending back so they know that their input is called out beyond, separate from just basic public input? Would that help them? Will help us be able to move forward today with putting this out to the public?
If I'm hearing you correctly, yeah, capture all theirs in one document with their feedback. So have that on record, and then general public on a second. Yeah, I can do that. And I think just to clarify what we need to decide today is, are you giving the thumbs up to send it out right now if we want to, or if staff decides it makes sense to wait a week and see what ARC input is and then send it out. Basically, if you're giving the go ahead to send it out whenever we see appropriate in the next.
Why don't
within-
we, any other commissioners? Doug?
Yeah, I have an issue, just thought about. I sent Charlie some comments on it just Tuesday, having to do with the RFP process. And I understand he's gotten other comments from people on the latest draft. And it would seem to me that if we send it out now, we're kind of sending out saying, this is what the commission has approved, subject to getting ARC's comments. And I didn't know that today would be a discussion of these points, so I did not send my comments to everybody else. I just sent them to Charlie. And so I am concerned about the process, thinking back about it. So if we send it out, I think we need to send it out with the idea that it's in the process of revision, and we're still accepting comments, and it's not the final act of the commission.
Right, all we would be doing would be approving a draft release to the public, and seeking public comments. I'm wondering if it would be good. I drafted a new potential timeline that kind of shows this going alongside the rest of the CAFELT process, just as a starting point for discussion of how we continue the timeline, since we're off a little bit. And I wonder if I should screen share so we're looking at something. What do you think, Lincoln? You and Charlie got it. I know it was late last night, so I don't know if it's helpful.
Yep. No, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay, so share screen. Okay, so just to focus on where the red line is and the arrows, because everything above that has already happened. So I don't before we get into that, I don't want to, create any political issues with the ag resource team. But at the same time, I don't know that I want to elevate the ag resource teams with their set of priorities over what the general public wants in terms of balancing our support and efforts of agricultural within our overall mandate. So that's one of my other things about waiting to get the one team and then moving forward versus, is there a reason why we can't just open it up and include that? I don't see anything really controversial in there, but we can go back to that. I just wanted to make that comment. Okay, so line item 14 up here. I wanted to mention, I've been talking with Lincoln and Tanya. Tanya actually had a better idea this morning. We are going to have a landing page, or it's going to be just a link to a PDF document for Caulfield Farm Preserve that would have links to all supporting documents, the conservation easement, the management plan, the CART report, the reserve study, any updated timeline that's approved, et cetera, et cetera. So the next time we go out with an updated press release, and even when the RFP goes out, there will be a link to a single area where all of the repository of all of the related background documents would be. And eventually, when it's ready, our ag goals and policy document would be in there as well. So I just wanted to mention that. So I think we're pretty close to having that. Tanya's idea this morning, which will kind of shortcut having to build a web page, would be just a PDF document with all these links to it. So just wanted to let you know about that. I know, so we're still talking about when to release to public. Line item 15, what I had was thinking if we were ready to release it, and whether it's now or next week, but I was thinking sometime before the end of December, and give about, I was hoping for at least 2 weeks for public comments. If we could jump over to item 17 and mention that we are going to keep December 17th as our meeting date. In the past, we had talked about having our land bank meeting in December be on the 10th, but we're going to keep it at the 17th with the afternoon to be facilitated retreat topic. One idea Lincoln and I discussed was on the 17th, having a very abbreviated meeting to approve minutes in the morning, and any other, take general public comments and any announcements. And then from right after that, say from 9 to 12 or 9:30 to 12:30 or something like that, we would also have our facilitator facilitate a conversation getting into the meat of the Caulfield discussion, so that we would be prepared moving forward to the next step with an RFP, if that's what's decided and what those considerations would be. So we can talk about that idea versus having a whole separate meeting, but it seemed like as we're running out of time, it needed to be in December. And so I'm curious what you all think of that. And if we agree with that, then we would want public comments, to receive all public comments and other comments within a week prior to that, so they could be assembled and we'd have all of that information in time for that meeting on the 17th. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute so I can see your faces. Curious to what, any comments or thoughts about that, so that we can start with the end point and then work backwards.
Well, if we want public comments to assemble and consider before December 17th, we better put our stuff out there for comment. Give people some time to do it.
What do you all think about December 17th as being a basically the bulk of the meeting, or we could consider it a separate meeting, but still all on the same day, and have that when our facilitator is available, and have it be facilitated so I can be part of the participants and not thinking about running the meeting. Or do you all like the idea of doing it on that day?
Yes.
I'm fine with it.
Yep.
Lincoln, had you talked with John and he's good with it?
Yeah, he'll be fine. I haven't gotten, we haven't talked about all the details yet, but he's fine.
Okay, so one of my, well, there's two things. One reason to have it in December is, if I go back to the timeline, you can see that really we need by next June to be receiving and evaluating the RFPs. The goal is to have this wrapped up so we don't have to do another lease extension. I think that would be, we need to avoid that at all costs and get moving on it. So if you back that up, we really need to wrap this up in December. The other reason for that is if Doug is leaving the commission, potentially Brian, we don't know, but I think it's important to get their perspectives, having been so involved in the process. We're waiting for the discussions for new commissioners to join. It would be playing catch up, and I think we won't have as robust of a discussion.
Yep.
Okay, so that's agreed, December 17th for that meeting. So then when you backtrack on when we would need public comments by, or all comments by, I come up with December 10th. And then so going back to the timeline, Charlie, where is it? That starts to get into the crunch of why, if we had the total luxury of time and we didn't have this June date, then I could see stretching it out and waiting. But now that you see how this is kind of lining up and wanting to allow people enough time to comment.
Yeah, I see that. And I think that's really important. But it's also a longstanding document that if the commission feels comfortable with how it is now, and there's kind of a general sense of these objectives and policy, it seems like we could work from that through this process if needed. If public comes back with feedback that's going to take a lot more time and conversation than we expect, then it may need to drag on longer than we hope. It may be smooth, but I just want to make sure that's clear that it's kind of a curveball.
Right.
Something out there.
We don't know, we're putting it out and we don't know what we're going to get back and what else needs to really get into the meat of it. So Go ahead.
Oh, I understand the timeline, so I'll discuss that with Faith at ARC and just make it clear that this is what we're working with and need to get it out to public as soon as possible, really.
I mean, I would say, so they will have had it, if they got it last week, they would have it in advance, you know, by the time Tanya gets back and there's a release published, and, you know, it still may end up being the end of November before it gets released to the public. So I wonder if, let's see, I'm looking at my calendar here. Of course, the end of November is like right around the corner. So I understand what you're saying. It's been a document they've asked for a long time. And now we're saying, okay, here it is. And basically you have 2 weeks to get back to us with all your comments. Yeah. Well, what do you guys think? In order to stay on this kind of timeline, we have to get it released to the public soon.
Well, one thing I'm looking at December 10th, which is a Friday. Could we make it December 13th, which is a Monday? I mean, we're not going to be looking at it over the weekend or doing anything probably over the weekend. And it would give people some opportunity that weekend to finish their comments.
That's a great point. Good point, Doug.
Sandy, is there any reason why we shouldn't in fact extend it until our meeting the following Friday, December 17th?
Well, my thought was that the public comments, there is going to take a period of time to assemble them. You know, they're going to all come in, and I thought it would come then in our meeting packet, that we would have several days to review and digest all of these. And then we have the meeting, and at that meeting, there's also a time for verbal public comment, but at least we will have been able to absorb. That was my thought
I understand that, but generally the verbal comment is included in the comment period. And I think we could accommodate both by asking people to submit written comments by the 13th, but actually cap the public comment period on the 17th. That way we'd hopefully get most of the comments by the 13th and be able to assemble and digest them.
That sounds good. Does that timeline, everyone think that sounds good?
Yeah, I think as long as we need to get it out by or before the 1st of December, because then that will be just squeaking through at almost 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can give that much less time. And to speak to your concern, Sandy, about elevating the ARC above public comment, I wasn't saying that so much, maybe a little bit, but what I was trying to do was just say to clearly point out where their input is coming in, like there's initials on the comments in here on the first draft of corrections or whatever, so that we just know which ones are coming from that group. I think would help. So yeah, I'm not trying to make their input of a higher value necessarily, although they have a pretty strong vested interest, but just being able to differentiate between the general public and that group's work. That's what I would like to see.
Right, so that their comment would come in, they'd be making one comment on behalf of their group, and we could look at,
Yeah, that's what I would hope. I think it would be problematic if we're taking input from various individuals within that group, then we don't really know.
Yeah.
what's happening. If they differ from that committee's final agreement on input, then they can always submit it as an individual as public comment.
I think we'd
And
be,
I,
yeah. Go ahead, Charlie.
Sandy, I think the next ARC meeting's on the December 14th, which is
Hmm.
the day after the 13th. So being a committee, as you all know, voting on things, approving it. So we might have to wait till that day for an approved feedback from them. Just to put that out there, it might take a day longer, which I can work with compiling feedback.
Okay. But if they had their meeting on the 14th, it still may not be that you think that we would get the feedback on the 14th.
If they have a document that they've reviewed and have feedback, yeah, it would be a matter of approving it within the group, and then Faith could pass it over. So we should be able to get it on that day if they have it at that point.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Is everybody else okay with that?
Yes.
Fine.
Okay, that's good. Then, given that they will have gotten it last week, so then they would have a month, really basically a full month to have had it to comment on, and the public has 2 weeks, so they've had more time to digest it. That seems, being that they're a committee and can only move so quickly, that seems reasonable.
Mhm.
Okay, do you think there's anything politically problematic from what we're proposing? Charlie?
In the document.
No, the process.
Oh, the process.
that we're laying out. Are you feel comfortable with it?
It sounds good to me. Yeah. But others might know more.
Okay. All right. Then let's go back to, let me put the timeline up there again. And sorry, I know you can't look at the timeline, Miles. Okay, so the thing is, I think that also we need to release the market rent and reserve study as well. You know, it was included in our meeting materials, but I'm envisioning a press release to the public that says, here's the updated timeline, here's the meeting where the commission will be discussing X, Y, and Z. Here's a link to download all the documents. We're taking comments on the ag policy. And then within all of the supporting documents would be the rent and reserve study. I don't know if we would, and I think we should, I guess what I'm saying is we're accepting public comments on the general ag policy, but I think we still want to also accept public comments on the specifics of how we're going to approach Kaufelt Farm. And I think that we should have that prior, at the same thing, prior to December 13th. And then we've got all of that in time for a December 17th meeting. Does that sound good? I know it's a big document to digest, but basically all of the documents will be there. And again, if we can't make it and we start getting through it and we can't get this done in December, then it doesn't get done, but at least we're something is going to get, it'll have to, the end date will need to push out a little bit.
Sandy, I'm not seeing that timeline again, and I would
Oh,
be good
yes.
if I could see that.
Oh, I was just seeing it on my own screen. Let's see here.
I just wanted to see exactly what's outlined for that December 17th meeting, because that is, it's a lot to do, and I think we can get a lot done. But it's clear that we all have to have input and have read all those documents and be pretty well versed in them to have a productive discussion of all that on that day. But it looks good. I think it looks good.
Anyone have any other comments about?
Yeah, I would just add to that I think that if we have, I'll say both of those discussions on that day, it would help us to keep clear and simple to separate the discussions clearly. That is the ag policy and the reserve study.
So what if we, what if we included the ag policy as part of the general meeting? So we approve the minutes, hear any reports, and then discuss any changes to the ag policy. And if it could be that we, at that time, depending on what comes in, that we have the ability to approve it. If there isn't, if it looks like it looks now and there are no big controversial objections, we may be able to approve it. But then we'd have an end point, take a break, and then the whole rest of it would be related to Kaufeld Farm. Does that sound? I see what you're saying. Yes, it has to be
Sounds good to me.
one, the building block done before the specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Sandy, what document are we using for soil health benchmarks?
No, that's an excellent question. That just came to me last night. It's been it's been discussed that this should be our overriding stewardship component, and the way that we measure and maintain our agricultural properties. And if that's going to get included in a future lease or the future of the farm, how do we have to come up with some, I don't know that we're the ones to say it has to meet X objective, but I think that we kind of need to lay out a policy. Are we looking at maintaining or improving, or we've had comments that the land bank shouldn't be investing in soils for leased property because that creates unfair advantage when all farmers have to maintain their own soils. I think
Yeah, I think that's, I'm just calling it out because I think if we're going to discuss that, I don't believe the commission is the group that's going to figure that out. I think we need a document from staff or something that gives us something to work on that day. So I'm just looking to have backup material. Similarly with the desired public benefits, there was a lot of discussion, I know, in the survey that was done. I need to go back and look at that again, but I think we just should have, for each of those bullet points, we should be at least told where to refer, what to refer to, if we already have the document that may talk about that, or something that gives us just some, there's just a ton of information to get refreshed on. And so, and I'm not opposed to doing the work. I just think we just need to give direction as where what we're supposed to be looking at again.
Okay, that's a good idea. Charlie or Lincoln, do you have any, would it be the conservation district?
So I would say that the CART report would be the #1 starting point, which references pretty much everything related to Kaufelt. And yeah, there's the conservation district soil report, or I think it was the third party that put it together. But we can help assemble and highlight what pertains to each of these bullet points. But I think, yeah, there's some great thoughts and recommendations in the CART report around
Okay,
the soil health. And then we have soil tests for kind of the hard data.
okay.
And then my last comment would be, Sandy, that if whatever agenda is set up, that the bullet points be in the order that makes the most sense to build on work moving forward, that they're, in order of, once we do A, we can move it to B, moves to C, that it's a natural progression in topics, if that's possible. Like as an example, I don't know if this is in error, but preferred operating model, is that something we want to talk about second before we've talked about the reserve study? I'm just looking for something that looks somewhat sequential in terms of building information to get to that final topic about the RFP.
Okay, that's a good point. These were just randomly put together last night, but that makes sense. And also, the other thing is, again, since we'll have it facilitated, giving John the outline and kind of a clear, I guess, problem statement, or what it is that we want to have achieved at the end of each of those, so he can keep us focused on track. So I can work with staff. Maybe Krista, you'd be willing to help figure out how best to lay this out so we can achieve our goals.
Mhm.
Okay, good. And then one question I wanted to, or something I wanted to bring up is that, so Lincoln, I think we were talking about how long of a retreat in the afternoon?
Right.
So
yeah, I think that there are two questions. One, how long is people's stamina? Because it's going to be a long day, but I think what that pertains to is what can we actually do in the retreat? And I think I would say, we need to focus on 1 or 2 topics total. And if we even one topic, I think we could probably talk about for an hour or more easily, 2 even. So maybe that we need to pick one.
So that's a little bit later here on the agenda. We can talk about what our retreat topic or topics would be, and maybe we pick 2 topics if we have time, but a top priority if we don't have time, or if we run over on this other discussion. Again, with the calendar, the way it's laid out, I don't think we can push it down the road much further. So we really need to be committed to wrapping up and making decisions that day. Okay.
I have a question. I have a question
yes.
then about that. So I don't know, are we in the morning, in a 3-hour period, we're going to potentially address all those 6 bullet points, and then we're picking 1 or 2 of those for further discussion in the afternoon? I'm just
No.
not sure on what's happening.
No, Kaufelt is morning, afternoon is something else.
Wow.
Afternoon would be a retreat. I know it sounds
That's a lot to do in a morning. That was, but
Whoever is conscious at the end gets to make lots of decisions.
yeah, I don't know if this is possible.
Mhm.
And yet I know that our retreat and talking about some other things are important. Here's another option is that we make sure all of this happens on that day and we have the actual retreat portion in January. If we think it's too much, because it won't be just the time, but it will be the brain power that will be devoted to all of this. And we may not be as, creative and fresh to be then entering a whole nother retreat topic.
Well, I'd be curious to hear what other commissioners have to say, but I think those bullet points are substantial enough that you could spend the better part of 5 hours or more nailing some of that stuff down, unless John as facilitator can really cut to the chase, like on preferred operating model, we enter into that discussion by, there were 5, I think, mentioned in the CART report, 5 or 6. And, if we jump to eliminating 3 right away, so that we're talking about 3 or something, I just think there's just a lot. I'm in, I'll do whatever happens, but those topics right there look like a good day, a good long bad day. So.
I agree with Krista. I do think that that's in order to devote adequate time to these important issues. I kind of feel maybe it'd be better to put the retreat off till January for the rest of it.
Mhm.
So Sandy, I'm lost. I was confused by what Lincoln just said, which was Kaufeld in the morning and whatever else in the afternoon. I thought that we had agreed to discuss the ag policy in the morning and Kaufeld in the afternoon.
Okay, well, what we had talked about, but it's becoming clear that it's not possible, would be a general meeting and a very abbreviated general meeting and ag policy within like an hour of the 8:30 to 9:30. I don't even, look, today we had ag policy on the agenda and we haven't talked about it at all. We thought it was
That's
great.
right.
So there just may not be much to talk about unless there's something really controversial that comes up. And then we were going to continue the whole rest of the morning with Kaufeld, take a lunch break, and then dive into a retreat topic in the afternoon, or topics. And
That would be contingent on there being no disagreement or major comments on the ag policy, correct?
right, that, and the same thing for the Kaufeld portion, which is going to is very meaty. And
Yeah.
we need to also allow for public comments for both of those.
Yeah. I just wanted to assure that we were doing the general discussion on the ag policy first. I think that that's important. And, whenever that's wrapped up, I'm fine with going on with Kaufeld and whatever else. I don't think there will be much else, but that's fine.
Well, how do you feel about, so we need to book John for a certain time period, Lincoln? Oops, you're muted.
If, we would have him for the whole day. If we're talking
Okay.
about just doing Kaufeld one day and then a retreat second day, obviously we're going to have to bring him back for that.
Mhm.
So I don't know what his schedule is in January.
Okay, so we have him for the day. Well, I would, and the day meaning would be maybe 5 o'clock. I see a
Okay.
lot of caffeine getting consumed.
Yeah, no, it could particularly because it's remote. Yeah,
That's right. He won't be limited to a ferry schedule. Okay, well, I think that so the goal will be that we come up with when we get further, we might as well just talk about it now. It's on our agenda later for today, the December meeting retreat topic. So that's what we're talking about. We want to go ahead and talk about our potential retreat topics and narrow that down. And we could have that tacked on to the latter part of the day. And we just may need a longer break in between where we can get out and take a short walk or stretch legs or do jumping jacks or something like that. Do we have some potential retreat topics that we have already talked about making a retreat topic? I know we have. I don't have a list in front of me. You have some ideas, Lincoln, of things we've already, David?
I guess I just want to say that I feel like we ought to focus on Kaufeld before much else. I mean, it's ag policy, obviously, but like having a retreat on other topics and not having concluded our discussion of Kaufeld would feel wrong to me.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah, I would like to see that December meeting be committed to the ag policy and Kaufeld. And if we finish before noon by some miracle, then we have the afternoon off. If we don't, we just take a break and move into the afternoon and we just get that taken care of and have a retreat on something more typical to a retreat sometime in January. I think we just waited too long to do all this work to have us feel like we have to get it done by 1:30 because we have a retreat coming up. I think we should give it its due. And if we end early, great. And if we have to go a little longer, not so great, but worth it.
Right. Well, this is the pressing need and we don't have a retreat topic that's a pressing need. And again, I think that, but so what Lincoln's saying is we will have booked him for the day. So if we end up and we're done by 1 and we're paying for him, whatever his day rate is until 4 or something, we should have something, a backup of something else we may want to discuss that we could use the time. Or we get to that point and we say, you know what, we're done. We can't be at the screen anymore. Thank you, John. But we should have a contingency plan for what we can do. So what you're saying and what I'm hearing is we plan for it to be the ag policy and Kaufeld Farm. If we get done early and we reach a conclusion and we still have stamina, here's what we could talk about on that day. But otherwise, we just focus on this one topic. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think I would love to see Kaufeld Farm kind of wrapped up, and I think it's unrealistic to think that that's going to happen in less than a day with the ag policy discussion too. So, I mean, having the idea of a backup plan, a contingency plan with another topic, I think is fine. But if that contingency topic doesn't make it onto the tail end of the ag policy talk, I think Krista's idea of bumping that to the retreat topic makes sense to me in January and just doing like a regular retreat on a different topic. And we had a couple topics come up like climate change preparedness and that kind of thing that I'm sure would warrant half a day or whatever of discussion too. So I guess I'm saying we could definitely send you a list of topics, but I think it's unrealistic to think that Kaufeld and ag is going to take less than a day.
Yeah,
Yes.
so here's what I'd like to propose. I'd like to propose that we do not have a retreat topic for December 17th. And that we just say, this is what we're doing on this day. And when it's finished, we're done. You know, we don't know how long it's gonna take that day, but if it could be done early or it's not, but this is what's gonna be accomplished by the end of the day. And so everybody has their schedules cleared. This is the day it's gonna happen. Then in the future, in January, we can come up with a date and we will have at least one new commissioner and can get into bigger other topics. So that's my proposal. Forget having the other subject because we're not going to have the brain power to do it, even if there is time to do it.
I would second that.
I would third that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
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 All right then.
Good job.
Okay. Anything else about this December 17th meeting and potential and timeline that we've discussed with those couple of tweaks in the timeline, you know, the order of the discussion topics and the changing the public comment time period. Once those tweaks are made, can this timeline, this can be a public document so people can see the rest of the process. You agree, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. Next would be outreach and volunteer report. And Tanya's not, yes, I'm sorry.
Seems like we kind of reversed the order on the last topic, and we discussed the timeline, but we really haven't had any substantive discussion on the ag policy other than that everybody likes it. But I'd be interested before the meeting to know, I mean, Doug mentioned that he had a couple of comments. I know you do. I would like to know the other commissioners' comments at anything substantive.
David, do you have any input? David, Miles, who haven't we heard from on about the ag policy proposed latest draft?
My feelings about ag policy just kind of focus around Kaufeld and the stuff that Sandy, you and Brian and I discussed a little bit in email. And what I think it was Jennifer commented on in the beginning of this meeting. I want to drill down on that. And gap our framework here. So.
So I think that the other thing we should have in addition to this list of topics, decisions to be made for the December 17th meeting, is we should have a list of probing questions that we can send out to the commissioners. We can form why don't we form these questions now? We have time. I don't think our outreach and volunteer report is going to be very much, right? Lincoln, we can push that off. So why don't we focus on coming up with the questions that we want, the big questions that we want answered. And not that we're going to come up with the answers now, but at least we can come up with all of the big points that we want hit and discussed and determined at the December 17th meeting.
Are we talking now about ag policy, or are we talking about Kaufeld?
Okay, well, let's begin with the ag policy. I haven't heard anyone have any questions or concerns yet about it. So I was moving on to Kaufeld, but let's leave it open for the general ag policy first.
I guess my question about the policy as it stands right now without public input or from ARC is how this particular draft as it stands sits with staff. I know Charlie's comments are in here and I may have seen, it looks like Doug made some comments, but so I'm assuming in general, this is an acceptable document as it sits right now with staff, but I'd be curious to know if there were still some concerns or things they were waiting to hear about from public and ARC.
I think we've got general consensus. We do have, obviously we continue to talk about these things and do have questions that come up. But in general, this policy is, we're fine with it.
Yes, Brian.
Just a question to Krista. Krista, what are you looking at? You seem to be looking at a draft or a copy with comments from staff and maybe others. I haven't
Yeah.
seen that. I don't know what you're looking at.
Well, Charlie offered it up when he sent the attachment. He offered if you wanted a copy that tracked the changes. So I asked him for that. And it's just, it's largely there was a lot that was, different thoughts from different people and rearrangement of the formatting and the order of presentation. So it is kind of interesting to see how that kind of came into being, but it makes it a little harder to read because you have to start ignoring stuff. But so I'm quite impressed with it right now. So
Thank you. I'm happy with the way it turned out, so I guess I'll skip that for now.
Okay, so now we're breaking from drawing the line. That's the general ag policy. Now looking at the,
Sandy,
yes, yes.
one second. Doug, it
Yes.
looks like Doug's unmuted himself, so I'm.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Yes,
Do you want to, I do have a comment on the ag policy.
Yes.
And I sent it off to Charlie, and I guess I didn't realize, I should have sent it to everyone, but on
no,
page,
I don't think you can email everyone. That's a
Right.
public meeting kind of thing. So go ahead.
anyway, on page 10, we set out the leasing objectives, and in item 4, with respect to adjustment to the rates, we will consider adjustments based on other contributions of lessee to agricultural conservation goals of the land bank or lessee's contribution to maintenance. And my question really was to Charlie, and it didn't seem to be addressed in the policy, is that, you have one type of person who may be applying, like the LUMs, who will do a lot of maintenance, are willing to do a lot of maintenance and are capable of doing a lot of maintenance. Then you might have another person that wants to apply and they don't have the same capability. And how do we deal with that difference in the RFP process? Do we deal with it up front and say, if you provide this many hours of maintenance, your lease rate will be X. If you don't, your lease rate will be Y. And should that be in the RFP process, or is that in the negotiations with the applicants later? It just seemed to me that if we're going to make adjustments to the rent based on our goals or based on maintenance, we need to be more specific in setting it out. And I don't have an answer as to what that language should be, but that was a concern of mine because I could see an applicant who, just is willing to pay the maximum rent rate, being objecting if they don't get the lease because we went with somebody who could do major maintenance.
Mhm.
So that was the thing that jumped out at me on the policy.
Mhm.
Sandy, you look confused at what I'm saying.
Puzzling. Well, I'm trying to do the separation between the policy and the Kaufelt RFP process. So that's, I was trying to, it felt to me like your comments were related to Kaufelt because all of our other preserves are basically just perimeter fencing and very basic. So I was
But
wondering
that's
if,
still part, it's still part of
Right.
our, it's still part of
Yes.
the ag objectives,
Mhm.
overall objectives. And so
Yes.
that's what I was addressing. And it would apply to, it could apply to any other
to
place.
any, okay, got it. Peter,
Yeah, I have similar concerns to Doug on that. And I think it warrants more discussion, but I kind of feel like the ability to work for a lease reduction maybe ought to be contemplated after the RFP so that it's a level playing field. But and there's probably a lot more to discuss on it.
Mhm.
I think that's something I had envisioned for in that topic on the 17th, considerations for requests for proposal. And one of my comments to Charlie on the draft related to that same sentence that you just read, Doug, was to add public benefit at the end there, because we can also make adjustments in rent for, you know, educational activities and other things that, so I think that should be added in consideration.
I think my question too is how much do we spell that out? If we want to be fully transparent in the process and give everybody an equal opportunity, we should probably, in the RFP process, at least spell some of these things out. And it's when you look at the document for the RFP and all that, it doesn't spell it out, the attached document. So I think that is a topic of further discussion.
David?
Yeah, just in the abstract, I think that rent reductions for work by a tenant they can be fairly tricky in terms of, okay, so what are they going to do? How is it going to be documented? What would how do we determine the value of it? And if we need to be transparent with the public about why we're making a rent reduction, we better have a pretty good process and what it would have cost us otherwise. So, I mean, I guess I just have some automatic skepticism around that. And if we're going to incorporate something like that, we need to have a really clean process that everybody can understand, including documenting what's going on once it starts happening.
Peter, do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, my understanding right now is we don't have a formal agreement with the LUMs to do anything. We charge them rent. If they do stuff, we benefit from it, but we haven't, I don't know, we weren't looking at a situation last time where somebody, party A said, I can pay this much rent, and party B said, I can pay less rent, but I'll do work. We didn't have to negotiate that, as far as I recall.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
So that would be tricky.
Brian? Sorry.
So one of the things we could do, maybe I'll take a look at it and come up with some ideas as to what we can do. It's a very unusual lease provision. And, I'll take a closer look and maybe have something that I can propose as a possibility before the 17th meeting.
So have a draft RFP that we could be looking at?
Well, probably just a draft of that type of language. And quite frankly, it's very difficult. I think if we want to do what is set out in the the policy thing, if we want to do that, it's going to be very difficult. And I'll take a closer look at it. but we might give some thought to, I think we need to give a lot of thought to that.
I think we'll also need to allow time for John Kane, the county attorney, to review it, because, there's all kinds of implications for, the competitive process, and, it's complex.
I
So-
have a question too. It's related to the infrastructure and how much the land bank is going to put new infrastructure on a leased property relative to what's there. So this is on page 9 under agricultural infrastructure objectives. Invest in critical infrastructure and ag lands to facilitate ag best management practice and support agricultural viability. And I guess I mean that makes sense if there's existing infrastructure like Caulfield to maintain it. But if there's a property that doesn't have any infrastructure, and the term that the best use of it is, putting in a well and irrigating versus haying, at what point does it become a whole new enterprise because infrastructure is put on, and at what point is our role to create something new like that versus so kind of meet, I guess it's a question of matching what is existing on the property and creating like an entirely new enterprise. And I don't know where our role is in that related to how much infrastructure we had. So that would be a question I have too.
I guess I'm not clear if we're trying to answer questions at the moment. These are great retreat questions. I mean, I can take a stab at some of those, but
Yeah, that was just a general because I think we're just brainstorming questions for the retreat. So I don't need an answer for that for me. But.
That's right. Sorry, I lost track of that. Thanks, Miles.
So, I'm sorry. Yeah, Brian.
Going back to Doug's original question on the, where do you draw the line about, pardon me, about trading work versus lease payments? That kind of begs the question of the first question that we need to answer, it seems to me, is we need to define tenant responsibilities and land bank responsibilities. There's a certain area in the middle between those that I think is negotiable and where we need to be flexible. But as in any lease, there are tenant maintenance responsibilities, and I don't think that should be a question on the RFP. It should be clearly defined.
Yes, Sandy.
Sandy?
Two things. One is that when we get into those specifics, we need to keep in mind that the cost for maintenance for us isn't the actual, just the outlay of the dollars. It has to do with staff time. So when when we talk about that a building needs painted or something like that, the cost of the painter might even be one of the smallest parts of it. Our staff has to go through getting, multiple bids and the whole process and getting it approved and overseeing. So there's a lot of costs that actually cost us. And it's not just that cost, but it's taking, say, that steward away from doing something else. So I just want to bring that up, that when we start talking about that, we need to keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to bring out that would be helpful to receive prior to the December 17th meeting, and is some idea, David's brought this up multiple times, of what does it cost to steward our preserves? So we can look at, for example, if we decide that you know, Caulfield Farm requires $50,000 a year. I'm just pulling that number out of the air. How does that compare with our other preserves? I mean, is that just a drop in the bucket? Is it, you know, way more than other preserves? You know, we're talking about that we may need to do $300,000 worth of upgrades while we're doing this other big boardwalk. You know, maybe it's all in context, but we don't know.
Well, I had some communication with Aaron since the last meeting, and Aaron Walk, there seems to be a fair amount of data being collected already that it would have to be put together and there so that we could look at exactly what you're saying.
What do you think, Aaron? Is that? Would
sorry, Dave.
Yeah, would you be able to put together some historic, maybe it's an over the last 10 years, annualized stewardship costs for various, you know, by preserve, so we can, when we're talking about how much what we plan to invest in Caulfield, we have it in context with what we are spending, just so that we know.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it could definitely be a very large data set for 10 years spending across all preserves, because there's a lot of it. I can certainly give summary based on supplies, professional services, and capital expenditures. You know, summarize numbers for each year in that format. And I can also give complete data on every expenditure. So I guess the question is for you, how detailed do you want this to be? Because I did share with David kind of two or three versions of that. And I'm really just looking for some direction of, you know, how much do you want to sift through compared to what's useful for your time to look through.
Personally feel like a general, like a summary would be useful.
Okay.
Like, what is it taking to maintain Mount Grant, Turtleback, or, you know, other places? Like, where are our biggest? It's not useful to find out that we spent $500 at a small preserve that's not open to the public. That doesn't matter.
Right.
It's the big costs. Where are the big costs?
Yeah. Do you want this
Start running the
down?
land bank as a private business? Where are the big costs? That's sort of like we're sort of analogous to a corporate board, but we're not looking at a whole category of information here as a commission. And I don't think you should spend a month putting together some junk. Put it together in 4 hours or something. Just a general thing that says this is kind of what it looks like. And then we'd have some idea, and maybe we'd want more, but maybe at that point we'd say, okay, now I know, because now I know nothing. Like right now, I know nothing. I know that we budget a little over $1 million for stewardship a year. I don't know where it goes. I don't know if it costs a fortune to keep Turtleback open, or hardly anything, or somewhere in between, or anything, you know, nothing, no idea.
Okay. Yeah, I can certainly do that, and I will give, if 10 years is the time frame that you'd like, I can break it out 10 years for a summarize each year by those categories for 10 years individually, if that's how you'd like to see it.
I think what you're not going to have, though, is the breakdown of staff time. And frankly, you know, we can have people estimate, like at the end of a period. I think that might be possible. There's no way we're going to track through the course of a day how many hours you spend doing what. That's just not possible.
I think lacking any hard data, like if you're not collecting everybody's hours per day at different preserves on different tasks, then looking at a year's data and saying, okay, we spent a bunch of time opening Zylstra this year, and try to apportion the costs in some relatively accurate way without making it into like a dissertation. Yeah, I think you could come up with something very useful without going too far. Because you guys know where you spend your time and you know what you're spending money on.
David, I'll get to you just a second, Doug. Could I ask you to be the one to have Aaron and Lincoln maybe get back to you with the format and have you, set eyes on it and get it to the point where you think this is what would be useful, and then we can get it out to the rest of the commission. Okay, thank you. Doug McCutcheon.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up that on a couple quick thoughts too. I agree with what Lincoln said in terms of categorizing what we do, because it's so hard. There's so many things that overlap. And like when we're working at Zylstra, if we were in the private realm, you'd be out doing your construction work or whatnot, and you can categorize that really easily. But we end up having to kind of wear multiple hats, not the least of which is engaging with the public. And so we might be out there for 10 hours and we work for 6 of those hours, and 4 of those hours we're answering questions or whatnot, on a really busy day. The other thing that would be really, really hard to account for is volunteer time. We put out a call for volunteers. We might get 1 person. We might get 19 people. That varies a lot. That varies hugely the last 2 years during the pandemic, where our volunteer use has dropped dramatically, just for obvious reasons. If you went back to 2019, at the end of the year, we were kind of tabulating numbers of work parties and things, and I think a couple of these might have been Youth Conservation Corps crews, but we figured out we did 52 work parties in 2019. So the amount of time we're getting from volunteers there is phenomenal, but also we're spending time coordinating those events and those sorts of things. So that's really hard to capture as well. So I think you might be able to get some broad brushed things very easily from the direct expenses. From our time, it's going to be really hard to parse out all of the diversity of things we're doing at any given time on a property. And then that total difficult thing of the volunteer time is just, I don't know how we can come up with even an average, because that varies just so much event to event and year to year. So thank you.
So David, or everybody, I'm thinking that when we're trying to understand costs, so we can know it, but also be able to have the Caufelt projected costs in perspective. The projected costs at Caufelt that we'll be looking at will be hard costs. We won't be looking at staff time. So I think it's okay if we don't have data on staff time for preserves, because for budgeting purposes, we're only looking at hard numbers that we're laying out. What do you think? Miles?
Yeah. Well, this is it's the same topic that I have a question on, which is maybe a question just for general agricultural policy for the retreat, which is when we do lease a property out like Caufelt, is the intention that the lease covers the cost of operations for us? So that by itself, I think, is a really reasonable question. As an example, just with Caufelt, like on that appraisal that was just done, the expenses over 10 years is $14,000 more than what the recommended rent is for that property. So that means over 10 years, we'd be losing $14,000 on it just by leasing what the recommended lease is. So is that something that the land bank is okay? Is there a certain target that we should have? Like the leasee has to hit 50% of what the cost is. So I think that that's a general question that relates to what our actual expenses are for these types of farm operations and in our properties in general. But yeah, so I want to bring that into the discussion.
I think that's a really good point, Miles. And one thought that comes to mind is the more that we would spend over and above what we're getting income, better track to be attributable to public benefit. So there you go. You know, if we had an agricultural property, it's not open to the public, it's not, you know, whatever, then to me, the lease payments should be covering it. But if we get in a situation where, for example, if we came up with the lease payment for Kaufelt and it was at a point that, well, nobody's even gonna apply for it, and we need to adjust it down to what's reasonable, we need to be able to show what all public benefits are coming from that money that we're spending, the extra money.
That goes along with what Doug was talking about in terms of maintenance. It's one of those things that's hard to quantify, but public benefit was a big issue in the survey and the CART report and whatnot. And so it's tricky trying to develop an RFP that addresses leasing and usage of the property and then potentially adding something on where the lease amount can be lessened. Whether you decide that, then are you requiring that person to do a certain amount of education and outreach or public access? So it is something that I think that we need to address along with that maintenance issue of trying to defer costs by having the farmer do some of the maintenance. It'll be tricky. And lastly, on that analysis, that financial analysis, I think one of the things we look at, the annual lease rate that he puts out there, if it's not covering all our expenses, there are some of those expenses that I think are ours, and this will come up, I think should come up in the discussion, like the whole electrical thing, bringing it up to code. That's we're the landlord. It should be a safe place for people to work. So we should be looking at those costs. I did have a question on the fencing amounts that Peter's looking into, but just in general, he outlines the fencing for perimeter and interior. And I think that we can have some discussion on some of that interior fencing, because that may be modified or changed depending on who, you know, takes on the long-term lease, what type of a model that they have going. But as a minimum, we should probably enclose the perimeter of that property. So there may be some of those expenses that may not be needed, even in a 10-year period, depending on how long our lease is. If the farmer comes in and says, I don't even need that fence, in fact, I would rip it out, whatever, you know, we would not necessarily incur that expense. So I don't think we have to cover all our expenses 100% because we don't really know what those are. We have a better idea. I love this report. It was great.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind too is the fact that if it's a capital expenditure, that the benefit is accruing to us,
Exactly.
not to the lessee.
Right.
So there's, you know, you're always going to have those.
Okay, so can we officially skip over the outreach and volunteer report since Tanya's not here? We did have, as mentioned, we had the community conversation, and she has sent out a follow-up, the results from the survey, and there were some really good ideas that were put forth that maybe the communications committee can further talk about at our next meeting. So then the last thing to address is if we're going to have a retreat in January, then we either need to determine now what the retreat topic or topics would be, or else we need to do that in the morning of the December meeting.
Well, I think, we do, Miles is right. I was just looking back over my notes for potential retreat topics, and that the question of stewarding in the face of climate change is definitely a big one, as well as some bigger stewardship questions. And then there's also the question of public perception. Something that was raised was maybe having more discussion about the Polis survey, things along those lines as well.
And what about the habitat conservation plan? Is that what's due to be updated this year, or?
Yeah, well, there are a number of things going on in terms of planning. One is we're going to have to do an update to the Parks, Trails, and Natural Areas plan. So we will be working on that, so we remain eligible for grant funding from the state. The Habitat Conservation Plan is something else that is due for an update. I think it's held up actually pretty well. But I did have a conversation with the Preservation Trust's consultants. They're doing their strategic conservation plan. And those folks actually worked on the last Parks, Trails, and Natural Areas plan. So a lot of good GIS capacity in that group. So we'll be talking to them too. There's going to be a lot of overlap in terms of our habitat conservation plan and the trust strategic plan.
Okay, good. So maybe we can assemble a list of topics. So we have a list in front of us, and then we can pick 2 or 3. That shouldn't take too long in the December meeting. All right. Anything else before we adjourn? Yes, Brian?
Yeah, Sandy, just in terms of topics for the next meetings, or next meeting specifically, now that we've determined the format for the meeting, I just wanted to reiterate your suggestion that we, as a commission, come up with a list of probing questions. I like that, probing questions for the meeting. So I would suggest that any of the commissioners send those to you and Lincoln in advance of the meeting.
Okay, that sounds good. And then maybe what we can do is put together basically a homework package for the commissioners that says, here, here are the questions, here's the order of what we're going to discuss, here are links to all of the background documents for each of them, so we're not searching for them. And then we have a couple of weeks to be prepared for the meeting. So that's good. Yes, send your big probing questions to us.
Also,
sorry.
Go ahead, Miles.
Well, I wanted to, just before we close it, I wanted to give a shout out too for the stewardship report this month. Had a lot of really great photos, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
I don't know, because there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the world, but it seemed like it was more of a photo journal, which is great. So thanks for stewards for supplying those great photos.
Yeah, that's great.
Pre-storm photos.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it looks like, yeah, there's Steve Alvey is here and raised his hand. I just wanted to point that out. if you want to take a question from Steve, Sandy.
Okay, Steve, sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll make it very short. I get tired of complimenting you folks, and I sit through these meetings trying to find a weak spot and some frayed end on the fabric of what you're doing and try to pull on it. And I swear, you guys are great. I'll tell you, you know, the old saying, I've never had so few done so much, I think applies to you guys. And my astute daughter told my wife and I, after nearly 45 years of marriage, living in little cabins and things out in the woods in Alaska, that we never made marriage look easy, but we made it look real. And I would apply that to you guys too. Your transparency, your discussions are just wonderful. And so I missed this morning, and I wanted to weigh in a little bit more about the overall goals of the land conservation having something to do with adaptation to climate change, as well as community resilience, because these lands are for community. But you guys covered so much, and you've already made decisions. So now I know I need to weigh in a little bit on the overall agricultural policies, and that you're going to have a retreat that might talk about those things, you know, and it just makes me feel really good. And I want to just commend you folks for the work you're doing. It's invaluable. It's just wonderful. So thank you.
Wow. Wow, that's a great note to end on. Thank you, Steve. All right. With that, at 11:39, we will end the meeting. Thank you all.
Goodbye, all.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.